Hey friends, this is Mrs. Wolfie from Our Half Acre Homestead. And I know it's not winter and all that stuff, but I mean, until my garden is ready for harvesting, I find myself every once in a while with a little bit of time on my hands. Not much, but enough. So I do a lot of my own knitting, and my family loves my hand knit socks. And of course, I can't knit with just plain colors most of the time because they're boring. But anyway, the only problem with hand knit socks is they're a lot of work and they seem to wear out fairly quick. Now, not as quick as cheap store-bought socks, but you know, I'm not going to throw out a whole sock that I spent, you know, a couple of days knitting because of a hole. So we're going to darn it. I'm going to show you how to darn it. And now back in the old days, they used to have something called a sock egg. And it would be, and I have a similar one that my sister gave me, but it's too big for socks. If you don't have a sock egg, you can use a light bulb, okay? If you come across a sock egg, and it's just a wooden egg, then, you know, at a secondhand store or an estate sale or something, I advise you to grab it because a lot of people don't even know what they are anymore. Now I've just got a plastic beginner's learning darning needle and some yarn here. And what darning is a cross between sewing and weaving. Now we don't want any knots, especially here because this is the heel. But what we're going to do is I've threaded this and I've made it with a similar but opposite enough color that hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm doing. So what you do is you start on the outside edge and you just kind of weave. Now this isn't a very strong needle. Metal is better, but I don't have any metal ones with blunt ends. And we're just going to start from one side. I had to go back a little bit farther. What you want to do is you want to start on the outside on either side of the hole. And we're just going to weave this through the stitching, and we are not going to have a knot because of course you don't want to be stepping on a knot. Now like I said, I've chosen pink thread because pale pink yarn because this is what I have, and it's hopefully going to be fairly easy for you to see. And we are just going to weave this down the sock. Now it doesn't matter if it doesn't necessarily conform to the shape of the sock, as long as it's nice and flat. All right, and then we're going to turn it around and we are going to do the same. Now what we're doing essentially is we're building a base to weave from. And when you get to the hole, you just leave that in a line. We're just going to weave that across and pick up the weakest thread on the other side. Now you see how this is just there? It's just there. I guess I could have picked a different color to show over the white of the bulb. But anyway, and if once you get so that there's more fabric, you can move your thread down. We're going to move it over one. We're going to pick that up there. And then we're just going to pull. And we're going to go across. See that loose thread there? We're just going to go under it. And the last thread, I went over it. So I'm going to go under this one. And then just pick this up here. And at the next one. And basically, we're just going to weave a patch in. Now, I know this seems like a lot of tedious work, folks, but you know what? Knitting socks is something that not too many people do for anymore. And like I said, once you have your socks knit, they're not art pieces, folks. They're to be worn on your feet to keep your toes toasty. So what happens is you want to repair them. You know, I mean, you put a lot of work. Now, if you have a couple of odd, like I have an odd thread there. But now we can see, if you can see here, we're getting into the knitted part. So I am just going to hit the next stitch here. You want to always kind of keep the edge of the fabric so that it actually holds it down flat as you begin your weaving later. And you want your things to be fairly close together. Like I have a bit of a gap there, but mind you, when I start weaving, it'll tighten up. Every year at Christmas, my family gets all new socks and underwear. I know it doesn't seem very much like a Christmassy kind of present, but it's a necessary thing, and my children were raised that Christmas isn't necessarily all about toys and candy. Anyway, long story short, every year my husband gets, I don't know, 20 pairs of black socks, and my son gets 20 pairs of gray socks, and I get 10 or 20 pairs of white socks. I don't wear a lot of socks. But anyway, my older son gets navy blue. Okay? Now, one of the reasons I color code all our socks is so that there's no arguments when it comes to laundry time. But this past year, I bought the normal every year recommended amount of socks for my family, and I'm noticing that although I'm paying the same prices, and in some cases prices seem to have gone down, unfortunately, so has the quality of the sock. And I'm noticing my husband's socks are getting holes in them after 2 or 3 wears. And you know what? That is just way too disposable for me. So now I'm faced with having to buy better socks. And, you know, socks that won't wear out as easy, and they're getting expensive. So I'm going back to knitting socks. And I think I'm going to find finer yarn. And I'm not going to buy necessarily this acrylic yarn anymore. I've got a line on 80% to 90% wool. And there's a way of washing wool socks so that they don't shrink, and there's a way of drying them so they don't shrink. So that's what I think I'm going to have to do. All right, so we have our base here across the heel. And now all we're going to do is we're going to work our way back to the very first thread, and we're just going to start to weave. Oh God, I hope you can see this. I wish I had picked a more contrasting color against the light bulb here, or our sock egg. And now we're just going to, again, starting at the part where it was the weakest, because you don't want to weave using the outside frame. You don't want to use the weakest part because it'll just fall apart the first time you use it. So you want to, you know, start your weaving pattern back at the very strongest edge. Now I'm just going to square up this edge before we begin weaving. I want to go through the thickest part here. And if this is done correctly, you won't feel the patch. Now that we're getting into the weaving here. And remember, always go out to the outside strong edge. Okay, now we're just basically going to weave. See, I don't know how well you can see, but there is, I went over this piece, under, over, under. Now we're going to go under this one and then over, and we're going to do the opposite. And basically, folks, we are just weaving. And if this looks loose, it's because it is. However, we can always go back and strengthen that up with another row of weaving. So we're just going to pull this down just like you would in a loom. When I used to make socks for my father, God rest his soul, he was a diabetic, type 2 diabetic at the end, and his feet were always cold. His feet were always cold. And so I knit him socks, and one day I went to visit, and here his socks, the balls of the feet had worn out. And I said, well, Dad, let me fix those. And he said, oh, no, there'd be lumps. And I said, no, I'll darn them. He said, you can do that? Because I don't think, you know, because my mother died so young, I don't think he thought I had been paying attention when it came time to learn things from my elders, you know. But I did, and I yarned it all up for him, and he was quite happy about that. Because he really did enjoy my hand knit socks because they kept his feet warm. And he wore them all year round too. Once you get the outside edges secure, the weaving part is really easy. The real tedious part, honestly, is making it so that you have a good foundation to weave to. Okay, here's our basic patch. See that? Not bad, eh? Now here's our basic patch, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more row here, and then I'm going to go back and do in between the rows for one simple reason. I want this patch to be strong. Once you have your nice patch foundation of weaving, you can just go back and forth over the weaker spots, and I'm about to lose my thread there, over the weaker spots so that you have a nice strong patch. And Bob's your uncle. There's our patch. Now, rather than have a knot, I am just going to weave this thread into the heel flap, if I can. I'll tell you something, folks. I'm going out today, and I'm going to get me a blunt nose darning metal stainless darning needle, because this is a pain in the butt to work with. So I've just woven the tail down into a place where it's not going to be a problem. Just like that. All right, look at that. No knots. What do you think? Let's take our sock egg out, or our light bulb. And there we go, folks. We have a darned sock. Now I have to go ahead and do this one because it's in the same place. But you get the general idea. Don't throw it out, folks. These things are really hard to make, but it's so easy to repair. This is the Mrs. Wolfie from Our Half Acre Homestead with just another forgotten skill.